Paula, thank you for that beautiful prelude by the Mexican composer Maria Griever. Thank you. Well, good morning and welcome to the final Sunday service of August 2021 of the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of San Miguel de Allende. It's hard to believe that less than 2 short years ago, the word COVID wasn't even part of our vocabulary. But we, like the rest of the world, have adapted to this new reality. With Zoom, we have been able to continue our services and reach many of you who might not have otherwise been able to participate. Whether you are a first-time visitor or a regular participant, we are delighted that you have chosen to join us today, wherever you may be. My name is Linda Sorin, and I am honored to be your service leader today. I am a member of the Sunday Service Committee and the Finance Committee. The UUFSMA is a welcoming community. Our fellowship is diverse. We are comprised of people of many faiths, or none at all. We welcome diversity of race, culture, gender identity, and sexual orientation. All are welcome in this fellowship. We encourage you to bring your questioning mind and your expansive heart to share in fellowship, reflection, and great music. Today, we're especially privileged to have as our guest speaker, Laura Carlson. Laura is well known to many of us in San Miguel, and I must say I'm a Laura Carlson groupie because every time she comes to town, I try to make it my business to go to hear what she has to say because it's always informative and enlightening. And Laura will be formally introduced later by her good friend Trish Snyder. So welcome, Laura. We invite everyone to stay after the service when you will be assigned to a breakout room. And if you wind up being one of only 2 or 3 people, please stay in the room and you will be assigned to a different room. Also, if you're a first visitor, and I know we have one for sure, please stay in the main room where you can be greeted by members of our member service committee. Anyone, in fact, can choose to stay in the main room and share some ideas, maybe make new friends and chat with old ones. And Laura has graciously agreed to join us in the main room after, so you can get to talk with Laura afterwards as well. You can learn more about what's going on in the fellowship and how you can be involved by going to our wonderful website, uufsma.org. We also invite you to look in today's order of service for announcement of activities and membership information. And now I'm going to turn it over to Donna Shubrooks, RN. She's a member of our COVID task force, and she's going to give us an update of what is happening. Donna, take it away.
I'm Donna Shubrooks, nurse on the COVID task force. You know, we recognize that we are all getting pretty tired of weekly COVID updates. But we have to remember the pandemic continues to affect the whole world in very serious ways. The Delta variant is almost like a different disease. It is far more contagious, even with very mild symptoms, such as fever, scratchy throat, cough, congestion, and body aches. Did you know that if you are infected, you are most contagious 2 days before you even develop symptoms? That's why precautions matter so much. And also for 3 days after the start of your symptoms. And if you never develop symptoms, you're still highly contagious in those early days of infection. So please be vigilant. If you have symptoms, get tested. Stay home, away from friends. Self-isolate. And remember that after travel to or from San Miguel, Nasal swab COVID testing is recommended on day 2 or 3 after travel exposure, or isolate for 10 days. Keep in mind the usual precautions that we have been taking really work. Vaccines, properly worn masks in public spaces and on transportation, and social distancing. It all kind of sucks, but it does work. There have been thousands of cases of COVID in San Miguel, but because of vaccines and sensible precautions, our fellowship is doing pretty well. We are taking care of each other. So please continue safe, supportive behavior for everyone. Our future is still very bright. And now, back to Linda Sorin for chalice lighting and our opening words.
We begin our service by lighting our chalice, a symbol of our Unitarian Universalist denomination, with words of Elizabeth McMaster. And I hope you can see me. You can't see it, but I can. The chalice is lit. We light our flaming chalice to illuminate the world we seek. In the search for truth, we must be just. In the search for justice, may we be loving. And in loving, may we find peace. Our opening words today are by Anita Barber Robinson. Welcome to a day of hope and promise, to a place of peace and comfort, to a journey toward truth and justice, and to a community of love and courage that will help us along the way. Now, please join in singing hymn number 68, One More Step.
One more step, we will take one more step, till there is peace for us, and everyone will take one more step. One more word, we will say one more word, till every word is heard by everyone. We'll say one more word. One more prayer, we will say one more prayer, till every prayer is shared by everyone. We'll say one more prayer. One more song, we will sing one more song, till every song is sung by everyone. We'll sing one more song.
I'm Dan Neuspiel, your fellowship president, and I add my welcome to all of you today. Please join me and Diego Vargas in reciting our spoken covenant. We respect the interdependent web of life and work for a just and peaceful world. We encourage the search for truth and meaning, strive for compassion in our relationships, and seek values that will benefit our lives and the lives of others. This is our covenant.
Respetamos todos los estilos de vida dentro de su red interdependiente y trabajamos por un mundo justo y pacífico. Alentamos la búsqueda de la verdad y la comprensión total. Nos esforzamos por mantener compasión en nuestras relaciones y buscamos valores que beneficien nuestras vidas y las vidas de los demás. Este es nuestro convenio.
Good morning. My name is Françoise Johalem, and I'm the co-chair of your care team. This is a very special moment in our service when we share our joys and concern. If you have a joy or concern you would like to share with us right now, please post it in the chat box. In the future, you may email them to Tom Rosiello, our minister. The following have been received by Tom this past few days. Once again, we hold Anne Garrier in our thoughts and prayers. Anne joined us from her hospital bed in Houston last Sunday, but she has now been released from the hospital and she's at her home in Houston. We light this candle and send our thoughts and prayers to support her on her recovery journey. The Reverend Louise Green, one of our favorite guest ministers, fell and broke her ankle in 3 places. She had surgery to repair the ankle this week and she's recovering. We send her our healing prayers and our best wishes. This is what she sent. Surgery went very well and I'm in the pain management zone. It is improving daily and I'm learning to manage walker and one-leg hops. So I appreciate your caring and abrazos to San Miguel. This is a candle for Louise. Here's a joy from John Sincerian, who has had knee replacement surgery on August 19th. He's doing very well and recuperating with Caroline in their vacation place in Vermont. This is for John. Our thoughts and prayers for the victims and families of the horrific attacks at the airport in Kabul. And also our prayers for the US and Afghan citizens who are desperately trying to depart from Afghanistan. Our prayers for the people in Louisiana and Mississippi who are in the path of Hurricane Ida. And this last candle is for the joys and concern that are deep in our hearts but have remained unspoken.
I am resilient, I trust the movement, I negate the chaos, uplift the negative. I'll show up at the table again and again and again. I'll close my mouth and learn to listen. Whoa, whoa, oh, oh. 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 These times are poignant, the winds have shifted. It's all we can do to stay uplifted. Pipelines through backyards, wolves howling out fronts. Yeah, I got my crew, but truth is what I want. Realigned and on point, power to the peaceful, prayers to the waters, women at the center, all vessels open to give and receive. Let's see the system brought down to its knees. Whoa, whoa, oh, oh. Whoa, whoa, oh, oh. Whoa, whoa, oh, oh. Ooh, ooh, ooh. Whoa, whoa, oh, oh. Whoa, whoa, oh, oh. Whoa, whoa, oh, oh. Ooh, ooh, ooh. of the fine things. My father taught me that I'm a speck of dust and this world was made for me. So let's go and try our luck, said I've got my roots down, 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 down deep. I've got my roots down, 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 down deep. I've got my roots down, down, down deep. I've got my roots down, down, down deep. So what are we doing here? What has been done? What are you gonna do about it when the world comes undone? My voice feels tiny, and I'm sure so does yours. Put us all together, make a mighty trust the movement. I negate the chaos, uplift the negative. I'll show up at the table again and again and again. I'll close my mouth and learn to listen.
Good morning. I am Joseph Plummer, Board Secretary of your fellowship. I would like to begin this time for generosity with a few words about your fellowship's care team, which assists members who need personalized support during recovery from illness or accident. Every team member is a volunteer, compensated only by the appreciation of those who receive assistance. Team members offer home visits, drop off meals, and provide many other short-term services. Reverend Tom Rossiello, our fellowship's minister, is part of the team, and he adds pastoral care to its services. Team members also work closely with the COVID task force. While they may not be first responders, team members have a well-earned reputation as constant responders to fellowship members in difficult stages of recovery. They visit our sick and homebound members, they deliver meals, they attend to pressing needs when partners and neighbors cannot do so. Because of the pandemic, the team has adapted home visits and team meetings to the virtual world of Zoom, and thus they continue to fulfill the team's mission during these challenging times. When the threat of COVID recedes, the team will return to meeting and visiting in person and will again offer the workshops and presentations that have been a big hit within the fellowship. You probably know members of the team. Francoise Yohalem and Joan Wolfe are the team's co-chairs, as well as Tom Rossiello, Deanna Ellsworth, Deanna Amaya, Gloria Brown, Hillary Doirila, Kathleen Bennett, Kay Miller, Michael Murphy, Janet Iyane, Jeannie Seward McGee, Louisa Field, and Suzanne Bacon are members too. Many of you may also remember the late Lydia Jane Failing, whose initiative, energy, and caring helped to build this vital resource for the fellowship. Much more can be said about the care team. It sponsors talks by experts, offers a service directory to help you find local doctors, hospitals, and caregivers. The directory itself is available at discoverysma.com. It offers you the fruit of the team's many visits to healthcare facilities and hospitals serving San Miguel. You can ask Joan Wolf at umich.edu, or Francoise.yohalem@gmail.com for the team's informative guide, what we do and what we don't do. Right now, however, as we pause the service so that you can donate money to support the fellowship, remember that your tax-deductible contributions also support this direct service that you may someday want to call upon for yourself. Thank you.
De ti yo recibo, a ti te doy, así compartimos y vivimos hoy. From you I receive, to you I give, together we share, and from this we live. De ti yo recibo, a ti te doy, así compartimos y vivimos hoy. From you I receive, to you I give, together we share, and from this we live.
Hi, I'm Cliff DuRand, your resident philosopher, with today's reflection. Laura Carlson's talk today got me thinking about Mexico's war on drugs, and about the deeper cultural meaning of this approach to a social problem that has been promoted by the US. In our country, we've seen a war on poverty, a war on crime, and a war on terrorism. Any major mobilization is likely to be spoken of as a war, whether metaphorically or militarily. And the US has a remarkable track record of losing both kinds of wars. Witness the 20 years of failure trying to build Afghan society. Yet we continue to think of major social efforts as wars. Why is that? Consider this. When there's a natural disaster somewhere in the world, the US is usually quick to send in the military. Other countries send in doctors, a more humane approach. This reflects the military culture that has seized our national consciousness. It is as if we cannot imagine a collective endeavor as a peaceful project, but instead think of it as a kind of combat against a foe. Why can't we just unite in a positive way to build institutions and programs that serve the common good? To do that, we would not need to be opposing an enemy or each other. And we would not be imposing punitive sanctions on countries we don't like. That, I think, is the spiritual message behind AMLO's alternative approach to Mexico's problem with drugs and cartels and their violence. His fourth transformation seeks to offer economic opportunity to Mexican youth, to rejuvenate the countryside, to root out corruption and impunity. Herculean tasks, to be sure. But in the long run, that is what is needed to solve Mexico's great problems. Systemic change, not a war on drugs. That is a long-term solution. And unfortunately, Mexico is living in the present. And that is what is making AMLO's visionary project so difficult. Will our society be able to transcend its military mentality and come to see how we must unite to build a better land, to build back better?
Good morning. I'm Trish Snyder, and I'm honored to introduce today's speaker, Laura Carlson. I consider Laura the chispa, or the spark for Ser Mujer. The first time we met, she offered to come to San Miguel if we ever planned to develop women's programs. We took her up on her offer many times. She's the chispa for many women and organizations on a global level, including the Nobel Women's Initiative. Since 2003, she has been the director of the Americas program. More recently, she was chosen to be the coordinator of Global Solidarity and Knowledge for JAZZ, the acronym for Just Associates. Her work involves supporting feminist movements in Mesoamerica, Southeast Asia, and Africa. She hosts a weekly live television program, HO in America, which attracts 5,000 to 10,000 viewers each Thursday night, and a weekly radio program Fridays at 4 p.m. She is widely published on U.S. Latin American relations and a regular contributor to USA Today, CNN, Al Jazeera Network, Democracy Now!, Pacifica Radio, and so many more. Her physician daughter works primarily with COVID patients and is now in Mexico City, and her son is an attorney in Mexico City, where Laura also lives. I remember one time she was giving a talk here, and there was some big news involving Trump and Lopez Obrador. She drove from Mexico City, ran into our house, and headed upstairs to the outdoor terrace to be away from noise so she could have this interview with a radio station in Los Angeles. Halfway through the interview, our neighbor's rooster crowed. "Is that a rooster I hear?" asked the radio guy. "This is Mexico," said Laura. Let's welcome my friend and yours, the unflappable and brilliant Laura Carlson.
Oh my, what a wonderful introduction, Trish. Thank you so much for that. And also Cliff for the reflection. And I think it's very pertinent to our remarks today. It's really a pleasure to be here with you again. It'd be more of a pleasure if we could get together. But as Trish mentioned, I'm really grateful to you all for continuing the precautions. As the mother of a COVID doctor, I know how necessary it is. And I'm glad that you have found these ways to continue the community by Zoom and to continue the education process, which has to do a little bit with what we're going to talk about today. You know, many of you have watched in alarm as the small state of Guanajuato, where you live, has taken first place in the number of homicides in the nation. Guanajuato had registered almost 4,000 assassinations last year, and it's above El Estado de Mexico and Chihuahua, which have traditionally been among the most violent states in the country, especially since the drug war was launched. The number of homicides has continued to go up in the country despite the promise of a change in policy. There were 36,579 last year, and the number has been around there at an all-time high for the past 3 years. It's looking like we'll see this about the same thing this year as well. The violence has really affected day-to-day life for many people, as I'm sure it has for all of you, although fortunately not directly as victims. The last time I think it was that I was there, we heard the entire drama play out. A shot, a cry, the sirens, the weeping, not blocks away from where we were at the time. We know the overall cause, a rivalry, a turf war between a local cartel and an expanding national one. But what does that really tell us about the dynamics of violence in daily life, and more importantly, about the way out of these cycles? In late July, the Foreign Minister, Marcelo Ebrard, stated to the Washington Post that the Merida Initiative is dead. The Merida Initiative, many of you will recall, is the United States aid package that was developed by the George Bush administration to support Mexico's war on drugs, in turn announced by then President Felipe Calderón in December of 2006. The Bush administration developed this 3-year aid package to support the Mexican war. And again, war is the operative word, as Cliff reminded us. And really the most important part for us to begin a questioning of this policy that's had such dreadful results over the past almost 15 years now. And the aid package provided equipment that you would typically associate with the war. It provided helicopters, small planes, for attacks and interceptions, surveillance equipment, and massive intelligence system that we're now seeing has been used against opposition members by the Peña Nieto government in the famous case of the Pegasus spy equipment that was purchased from Israel. And the stated reason was a recognition that the United States has a shared responsibility in the plight of drug trafficking, illegal drug trafficking through Mexico, and the strength of the cartels. The United States, as the major market for prohibited drugs, a very small proportion actually stay and are consumed in Mexico. The Mexican market is really of little interest relatively to the large cartels. And therefore, they argued they had a responsibility to help Mexico to reduce the power of the cartel. Now, this would make perfect sense. Obviously, the United States does have a responsibility, except that instead of assuming responsibility for the part of the transnational crime that takes place within U.S. territory, which is the size and the perseverance of the market for prohibited drugs, money laundering, and financial crimes, as well as the trafficking of arms to cartels and the problematic use and addiction in the United States, there was no corresponding commitment to resolve these issues in the United States. So in addition to supporting a weak president, Calderon, who arguably stole the election, the United States government bolstered the drug war as a pretext for extending its own security perimeters. This is something we've been seeing since the War on Terror, and again, why it's pertinent to mention that here. And they saw an opportunity under the pretext of the war on drugs to have a far greater participation in the national security apparatus of their closest neighbor, include, obviously, along with Canada. And a neighbor that had presented more potential security threats, according to national security advisors within the United States. This was kind of a dream come true for the Pentagon, because there'd been a lot of resistance. The pre-government had been closely aligned to the United States on economic issues and many other issues, but because it came from a more nationalist past, there was a lot of reticence to allowing the Pentagon, allowing the United States government to have active participation in the Mexican national security, so that the presence and the participation of, say, the DEA, ATF, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, FBI, CIA, was much more limited than it was when Felipe Calderón opened the door with the war on drugs and the initiative and the Merida Initiative began. They came in, U.S. agents at that point began to come into Mexico in far greater numbers than they had been before to apply this war on drugs model that was developed in the United States, and that basically, in this, of course, I'm simplifying, had to do with taking out the leaders of the drug cartels in order to weaken them in what's called by the DEA the Kingpin Strategy. We've seen this happen. There have been a number of arrests and assassination of cartel leaders throughout the entire period of the drug war. And what we have not seen is any weakening of the cartels. And what we have seen as well has been a huge increase, a spike in violence within Mexico during this time. With the expansion, the United States took over an entire building on Reforma in addition to the embassy itself. And now they are in the process of building, it's been a long process, one of the largest embassies in the entire world in Mexico, which is primarily dedicated to this war on drugs strategy that's been shared. We've talked a lot about the results. There's been, like I said, around more than 36,000 homicides a year. This is total homicides. There's no division that we can make. We can just watch the tendencies. But to get a baseline, before the war on drugs was launched, there were approximately between 2,000 and 5,000 homicides a year. So a great deal of that is attributable to the policy itself. And while the homicides have stayed relatively stable over these years, including the pandemic years, what we've seen is a steady rise in femicides. This has caused a great deal of tension between the López Obrador government and feminist organizations throughout the country who state that they are not doing enough to control the femicides within the country that are also related to this overall situation of violence. Then we also have to take into consideration, when we're looking at the results themselves, that the most recent announcement is that there are over 90,000 people who are disappeared or not located. Basically, there's two different categories. 90,000 people who are disappeared. That often has to do with the fact that drug cartels, again, in the context of the war on drugs, began to disappear bodies instead of leaving them out in the open. This is a huge tragedy for the families themselves, because it leaves them in this terrible limbo of not knowing what happened to their relatives. And that's why we have these very large victims organizations that are out searching with shovels for bones, or searching in prisons and morgues, trying to find relatives in processes that could take years and oftentimes are not successful. This is the overall situation that we have since this took place. When Marcelo Ebrard announced that the Merida Initiative was over then, it was in the context of the fact that the López Obrador government has said that they will not continue from the beginning, from the campaign, with the war on drugs strategy, that public safety, public security is going to be the first priority within their government. The problem with that is that we have not seen the kinds of changes that we expect if there were a deeper strategy change in the war on drugs. And we haven't seen the changes that we would expect in the US-Mexico relationship in security either. The last time, which was right before the election, that I went to talk with a group to people within the US Embassy. First of all, they were openly against the election of López Obrador, which gives you an idea of the overall attitude, like this is part of, we're in charge here, kind of. But when you first walk into the embassy offices, there's a big plaque of the Merida Initiative. And the Merida Initiative is the strategy, the binational strategy that basically takes precedent over any other aspect of the binational relationship since it was launched in 2008 with the first funding. I don't know if it's still there, but from the way that the actions of the U.S. agents within Mexico, it appears that they're continuing with that same strategy. One of the key incidents that gave us an idea that the Mexican government is at least trying to change that was the aborted capture of Obidio Guzman, the son of El Chapo, on October 17th in the year 2019 in Culiacán, Sinaloa. The operation and the messaging were a mess. They did manage to capture him, and as many people will recall, he was then released when there was a massive mobilization of the Sinaloa cartel, blocking off entries to Culiacán, which is their stronghold, and threatening an all-out war if Obidio was not released. And there was also a lot of muddledness, regarding who was making decisions there, made the decision that it was not worth it to risk the public safety, and Obidio was released. There was a lot of criticism, especially from a kind of a macho point of view of this decision, but that's the correct decision if there's truly a change in the logic of the war on drugs, because it was weighed at that moment that there was this threat to public safety that went beyond the justice goals of capturing someone who was actually captured because as a result of an arrest order issued in Washington, D.C., another sign of how Mexican public policy is responding to signals, from Washington, which has caused a lot of criticism in terms of national security of this strategy as well. The head of the public security at the time, Durazo, came out and said one thing, the armed forces said another. The presidential message was unclear at the beginning, but then President López Obrador stood by that decision, claiming that it was for public safety. What's happened since then has been less clear in terms of this hugs, not bullets strategy of López Obrador. We do see the longer-term social programs that are aimed at reducing the ability of the drug cartels to recruit in communities, to recruit young people who are at risk, to recruit others who have no other economic options, but we're also seeing the advance rather than a retreat of militarization within the country, and this has become a huge concern. From First of all, there was a formation of the National Guard. As many people will remember, there was a lot of participation, actually. The government opened up participation from civil society, and civil society groups were able to get a commitment that the National Guard would only exist for 5 years before turning over public safety tasks to the police, who are in the process of being reformed, and that it would be under civilian control rather than military control by being part of public security. None of that has actually panned out. There's a new proposal to change the National Guard to be directly under the Army, the Secretary of Defense, by the President Lopez Obrador. And there's also been very little progress in creating police forces that would be in a position to be ready to take over from the National Guard. Instead, we've seen the armed deployment of the National Guard on the borders, in large part in response to demands from the United States. And they continue to participate almost identically, mostly run by military members, almost the exact same way as any of the armed forces would participate in the drug war. There's a high number of statements of complicity with the drug cartels and violations of human rights. National organizations, international organizations, human rights organizations have been very clear that a nation should not have the armed forces in charge of public security issues, and that Mexico, in particular, there are recommendations that they should withdraw the armed forces. But this administration has fostered a very close relationship with the armed forces, and the use of the National Guard increasingly under the control of the military in the drug war for public safety has been part of the concessions that are made for the armed forces for reasons that we don't entirely know, but that have actually, as I mentioned, advanced the militarization within the country. From a feminist analysis, what happens to a society that is in large part run by the armed forces, a very patriarchal institution, is that you have a top-down, potentially authoritarian system, and you also begin to lose the social fabric by not involving civilian and growing civil society to respond to these social programs. You have a situation in many ways like Afghanistan, where competing armies rule the country for so long that there isn't a strong social fabric that is able to build peace at any point, or when the military control breaks down. And that's a point that we'll come back to. So what has to change? There are very, very strong powers involved in the current strategy that has created the inertia that we've seen today, despite the declarations from the Lopez Obrador government. The Pentagon is heavily invested in the Merida Initiative. It now is not part of it formally because they diverted military aid into a separate category to kind of make it less transparent. But through Northcom, through Southcom, through military training, and through supposed retired military that are operating in Mexico, it's very involved in Mexican security and will not let go of that easily. The U.S. arms and security industry is obviously very involved as well. The U.S. government has greatly benefited from Mexico's kind of allowing the U.S. government to be part of its security and to extend its security perimeter in this way. It's very important to say that these are not the same interests as you would see if we were talking about the U.S. people. You know, the extension of a security perimeter and the militarization of Mexico is certainly not in the interests of the U.S. people, but it corresponds to this national security doctrine that has been put in place since the War on Terror, that has really pitted the national security elite within the country against the interests of people everywhere, and also feeds into, the kind of mass incarceration and social control measures that we've seen from the Patriot Act on down within the United States. It's in the interest of private investment because it also relates to protecting private investment from social protests for the environmental and social impacts, what we've called arming NAFTA within Mexico. I want to go straight then to what some of the solutions are, although I do need to mention very quickly that the Biden administration, although it has indicated a change in a war on drugs strategy in the United States, Joe Biden has been a drug warrior since under the Obama administration. And it was the Obama administration that extended Bush's 3-year Merida Initiative into an indefinite initiative. And although much of the military equipment was then siphoned into training programs, including for justice and police reform, we never saw a real change in strategy between Merida 1 and what they called Merida 2. The first important step would be decriminalizing. This is happening in Mexico and in the United States. In Mexico, there's a decriminalization of marijuana law. In the United States, we've seen marijuana decriminalization, legalization advance in many states. This eliminates the black market, in short. And so the enormous illicit financial flows are chipped away at as they're brought into a legal economy, and we're able to treat problematic use with a more health basis. This also reduces the pseudo-moral discourse that was dehumanizing anyone associated with the prohibited drug trade, whether it's people who produce it in Mexico, many times very poor peasants who have no other options, some of the most vulnerable sectors, people who transit it, mules, oftentimes women who carry drugs because they need money to feed their children, youth that have no education opportunities or employment opportunities that are asked to be lookouts or to somehow work for the cartels, and begins to open the door for policies that can actually help these people. Some of the social programs are directed toward these sectors, but as Cliff mentioned, they're long-term. So the decriminalization is very important. The humane treatment for those involved in the underground drug market, as I mentioned. The third would be transforming this highly militarized strategy into an effective peace strategy. And that means demilitarization. We've been talking about this on the TV show. There's a new, very detailed report out from the Pro Center that is called Poder Militar, Military Power, and looks at the advance of the role of the military in the society, in Mexican society. And there's consensus among experts that it would probably have to be gradual. One reason, because the police are not in a condition, because of the corruption, to take over those tasks, and also because people have become accustomed to the presence of military. But a real roadmap for that demilitarization is very, very important because of the amount of violations of human rights that this has caused and that it creates. The feminist analyst draws a clear link between the military model and violence against women. We're seeing more guns in the country, whether legally imported through sales. There's a new report out on that, or the illegal trafficking over the border. And although this is an area they always talk about addressing with the U.S. government, we have not seen positive advances. The fourth are the social programs that we talked about. They're very important for the root causes. Again, they're long-term. They have to be very directed. They have to be analyzed and evaluated constantly. We don't know yet what the impact has been. Obviously, there has not been an impact so far on the violence levels, but they're still an important part of the equation. The justice system clearly has to be revised. There's some things happening. There's more action in Mexico against money laundering and white-collar crimes, but there's a long way to go there. And Mexico needs a clearer policy. Well, I just want to finish up by saying that it's important to remember that there's light at the end of this tunnel. Many of you will recall a time when we didn't have these problems of violence. It's not that it didn't exist, but it was nothing like it is today. The homicide rate actually per capita in Mexico was one of the lowest in the regions, and drug cartels operated, but without the involvement of violence that affected civil society to the degree that we're seeing now. There was extortion, but again, it was at much lower levels. So the positive aspect of this is the fact that the violence is a direct result of a public policy, which means that there's a possibility to turn it around. Not in the short term. Things have changed. We're not in the same situation we were in before the war on drugs was launched, but there is a possibility to turn things around. And a lot of that has to do with what peace workers have stated over and over again, that ending war is really building peace. And that means that much of those tasks have to do with the kinds of things that you people are already doing and your neighbors are already doing. The creation of the mutual aid societies and the rapid response to COVID, advocacy efforts, community building, grants to youth at risk, opportunities for youth and for women's organizations. The Mexican government needs to recognize and incorporate these actions as part of its security strategy, because otherwise they're treating us as the sheep that are set out to be protected by the military wolf. And that's never going to work. The true strength of peace building and breaking these terrible cycles of violence that we've been seeing actually lies in us and our capacity to build community and to demand social justice. Thank you very much for the time. It's always a pleasure to be with you, and I look forward to discussions or any comments you might have.
We'll build a land where we are.
but hold the light of hope and compassion throughout the week. And in closing, we have a calling in this world. We are called to honor diversity, to respect differences with dignity, and we are on a wide path. Let us be in affection and go our way in peace. When we will hear an old favorite, Stairway to Heaven, played by a favorite local musician, Almitri Tsigani.